Hey everyone. Wanted to say, good evening for those in the European time zone. Anybody calling in from the States and my side, good morning as well. I did see at least one person, I think, in the chat say hello from Illinois. So hello again. I'm local with you. My name's Scott Schindeldecker. I'm an experimentation solutions specialist here at LaunchDarkly, and I'm going to be the host today for our fireside chat. To make a really quick note of just a kind of a few housekeeping things to begin with. Let me share the agenda, just the overall time of what we're looking to cover, and then we'll get going. So, going to start off. We're going to introduce ourselves. I've got some amazing colleagues here that's going to share some of our experience with you. I'm going to kick us off by telling a little bit of an AI horror story to kind of get our brains going a little bit on the space that we're going to be talking about today, which is the burgeoning world of new generative AI and how experimentation kind of ties in with that. So we're going to do that. We're going to talk to Ayan, about scaling generative AI in AWS Bedrock. We've got Josh, who's going to talk to us about scaling experimentation. And then at the end, we're going to save some room for Q&A. So that's the general plan here. So I'll give you a quick, little bit more of an introduction of myself here. My name's Scott Schindlecker, like I said. I'm in the Chicago, Illinois area right now. I've spent about 25 years in professional IT, and the last 6 or so leading experimentation programs, both within kind of the private sector and then here at LaunchDarkly. I've been here for a little over a year. So that's a little bit about myself. Ayan, I'll have you introduce yourself.
Sure. My name is Ayan Ray. I'm a senior generative AI partner solutions architect with AWS and more than a decade of experience on AI and machine learning.
Awesome. And then Josh.
Hey, nice to meet you. I'm Josh from Gravity 9. So I'm a product owner that works largely with healthcare, utilities, and insurance. I've been in the product game for about 5 years with a background previously in project management. And yeah, AI is at the heart of quite a lot of what we do. So I'm super excited to talk about that today.
Amazing. All right. So everybody kind of get your questions ready. I mean, we'll have some dedicated time at the end for Q&A, but feel free to use the questions, throughout. We'll try to monitor for questions in the Q&A section as well. But we'll just go ahead and get started then. All right. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit. I'm going to tell you a little bit of a terrifying tale of AI gone wrong, and I think we can probably see these things often these days. In fact, my feed tends to have these things popping up often because I love to read about them. So I'm gonna talk a little bit about, and I'm using a stateside story here about this article that I ran across. This is a little over a year ago, but these same kinds of problems are ones that are facing us these days. And the article that I pulled this from was a press. The article that I pulled this from was quoting from a press release. The press release was talking about a first of its kind plan for responsible artificial intelligence in New York City government. And the intention was to connect business owners and aspiring entrepreneurs to content to help them start, operate, and grow businesses in New York City, right? So they've rolled out this new system that's supposed to kind of crawl through all of the New York City laws and regulations and answer questions for people on the legalities of setting up businesses and what is and isn't feasible or possible here. And, since this is a story about responsible AI, you guys can all probably guess what happened next, right? It went wrong. It started to give answers that weren't correct and oftentimes weren't legal. things like telling, owners that they could take a cut of their workers' tips, or telling people that they can discriminate against low income or other kinds of individuals in the housing market. That is really kind of the opposite of what we want as we're rolling out all of this new cool generative AI technology. So, one of the things that I think we like to talk about at LaunchDarkly, and I know this is something big in the industry as well, right? Artificial intelligence has real world impact, and we're trying to leverage all of this artificial intelligence to gain the positive impacts that we're going to have, all the operational efficiencies and gains that we're going to be able to do in terms of velocity. But the negative consequences of these things can be just as bad or even worse, right? Reputational damage is something that can easily be associated with these kinds of problems where your generative AI goes wrong, right? If I read that story, I'm probably not going to trust anything that the New York City government puts out in the generative AI space for a while after that. And I'm imagining the public as well. Broken customer trust, right? Like it's going to be hard for us as a company to say, I'm sorry that our chatbot told you, that this was the process, but the process is over here and it's going to cost you 5 times as much. That's a bad customer experience that's going to lead to turnover. Obviously, financial loss is something that is huge. And one of the pieces of financial loss that I like to talk about isn't just, something that the LLM did on accident. It can be computational costs, because a small change to a temperature or prompt setting can cause unintended consequences, and that can be a spiraling cost problem as well. And that's going to get you in just as much trouble as if you, do something that loses the company money in another way. And I like to think a lot about, obviously the legal ramifications here. If I'm building out a chatbot for my insurance company and it tells me that it's okay to go ahead and commit some light insurance fraud, that's probably a bad thing for me and my company as well. And then at the end of the day, operational disruptions are going to become a more prevalent part of this space, because as we start to build these more complicated processes with agents and RAGs, feeding into each other, and as some of these processes start to actually take the place of jobs or processes that are currently, working, any downtime, any problems in any of those agents or any of those systems is immediately going to be a problem for your operational efficiency, effectiveness. All of these things, I think, are really, truly giving a reason for us to be really careful about our development and execution of generative AI. But I don't think that means we have to, be less innovative. We have plenty of opportunities and plenty of tools out there in the marketplace that are coming out every day that are going to help us kind of solve for this new world of generative AI. And experimentation is going to play a major role in that as well, because experimentation is how we're going to start to see the actual customer impact of these new LLMs and agents and things like that. So I'm going to take a moment here. I'm just going to stop sharing screen and open this up. I've got some questions here. We're going to start in with the chat here with Ayan and go from there. So here, hang on for half a second. Let me stop sharing my screen. All right. And let's get going. How you doing today, Ayan?
Yeah, doing good. How are you, Scott?
I am doing well. I'm doing well. So, one of the first things I want to ask you about here is something that I feel is like every time I open up my new browser or go into Bedrock or something like that, there feels like there are 5, 10 new models out there that I could possibly choose from. How do you see teams like navigating this pace of change while, still making smart and scalable choices?
Yeah, that's actually very interesting, because just yesterday I was helping one of our customers, product manager at a healthcare AI startup, and she was trying to build AI assistant which can help summarize the reports of the lab reports and get insights out of it. She was very excited to see the power of generative AI, but also she asked me the same question. Like, Ayan, there are so many foundation models to choose from. How do I pick one? Now, I mean, like, it's like walking into a gelato store with 12 amazing flavors, but you don't know what you're in mood for. I mean, that, by the way, that happens with my wife all the time.
I am the worst at that. The bigger the menu, the longer it takes me to figure out what I want to eat.
Yeah, it does. So I asked her, what's this assistant supposed to do really well? She took a pause, reflected on it, and got back to me saying that, first of all, this assistant should be very good in summarizing documents. It should be able to translate the documents in simple language so that non-technical people can understand it. Next, it should avoid hallucinations. Like the example that you shared, Scott, right? It's so important to avoid hallucinations. And it should be able to respond in near real time. The responses should be fast. Now, that's a well-defined goal, you know? So that's the mantra. You choose a model based on, not based on hype, but based on fit for purpose. Like, you don't buy a sports car to drive off-road. That's also one of the reason that customers choose Amazon Bedrock, because first of all, you need access to so many foundation models, and with Amazon Bedrock you can access to the foundation models from Anthropic, Meta, Mistral. We also have our own Amazon Nova models and many more through a single API endpoint, and that gives users a wide choice to experiment on. So that's what I'm seeing. A lot of customers are using Amazon Bedrock to play around, experiment, and choose the foundation models to build their generative AI applications.
Yeah, I mean, I know for myself, when I first got my hands on LaunchDarkly's new AI configs product and said, hey, I've never implemented anything in Gen AI before, the first thing I did was connect it into AWS Bedrock because I had a whole list of any model that I wanted to choose. And I started with just some of the boilerplate, like the Nova models, and they did great things. So that makes a lot of sense in terms of, going to trusted places and then being very fit for purpose about, the choices that you make on the models that are available. Awesome. So, a lot of customers are probably, playing around with generative AI these days, right? But do you have any examples of how customers are using Bedrock to experiment with new models and prompts and trying things to figure out what actually delivers value rather than just playing around with some fun chatbots, which is what I've mostly done?
Yeah. So like I said, in Amazon Bedrock, you get a choice of high performing foundation models from leading AI companies, but you also get a broad set of other capabilities that helps you to build and also to scale your generative AI applications. So one of that feature that I would like to highlight is evaluation feature, Amazon Bedrock evaluations, where you can test across these models side by side. You can by changing, like, you can change the models and keep the prompt data and inference configuration parameters same, or you can do the other way around. You can keep the model same and try to enhance the quality based on the goal that you have set for this AI assistant by changing the prompt, changing the data, changing the inference configuration parameters. And that all happens through a very intuitive interface feature called Amazon Bedrock Evaluation. Also, one interesting thing is that mostly customers use these foundation models in conjunction with their data, a technique known as retrieval augmented generation, or RAG. So you also have capability to evaluate your RAG applications. Like you can evaluate the retrieval alone if it is able to retrieve all the right context from your knowledge base. But you can also evaluate the overall response, which is a combination of retrieval and also generation. So a lot of customers these days are using Amazon Bedrock evaluation to evaluate their generative AI applications.
Cool. I mean, it sounds like, one of the cool things that, again, LaunchDarkly's AI config product is also, playing in that space where we want to help people work fast, increase their velocity, but also, protect against the risk as well. So the ability to set up different models and test against each other, run actual experiments and things as well, is something that I think is truly going to be, necessary as we go along. So it's really cool to hear, Bedrock already building that in, to their product structure as well.
Yeah.
When you say, evaluations, what are you evaluating against? Do you pick a set of metrics that you're trying to measure between a set of models, or can you tell me a little bit more about how that works?
Yeah, sure. So we have a set of metrics in Bedrock evaluation feature. Like the metrics span across 4 key areas. Number one, it is the quality assessment, and we have metrics like correctness, completeness, faithfulness. The next area that we touch upon is user experience. Like we have metrics like helpfulness, coherence, relevance. The third area is instruction compliance, where we evaluate if the LLM, if the generative AI application is able to carry on, is able to execute the instructions or follow the instructions, and it follows a professional style or not. And the last area, but the most important one, in my opinion, is the safety monitoring. We evaluate against harmfulness, stereotyping, and refusal handling. So this is what we test this. Most of these metrics can be evaluated with or without ground truth, because that's also one of the challenges, because mostly organizations don't have a ground truth. So apart from 1 or 2 metrics, like most of these metrics also works without ground truth. So that's what the basic flow of evaluation is.
That makes total sense. Awesome. So I don't know, I was going to ask if there's a Bedrock feature that you wish more people knew about and used, something, it's kind of flying under the radar. Is this that thing, or is there something else out there that, is something that you wish more people knew about and used?
Yeah, I wish more people knew about evaluation, but I'll also highlight one feature within this Bedrock evaluation feature, which is like I talked a lot about evaluation, right? But evaluating generative AI applications aren't that easy, because the output of the models are stochastic or random. Like it might be similar in meaning, but textually it might be very different. Now,
That's right.
if you try to evaluate the response of a generative AI application against your ground truth and try to draw an apple-to-apple comparison, that strategy might not work, because it might be semantically similar but not textually similar. So that's the reason we have a feature called LLM as a judge, where you can use one of the curated high-performing foundation models available in Amazon Bedrock to evaluate the output of your generative AI or RAG applications. So that's one of the key features that we launched last reInvent, and I would encourage people to use it more. I was also one of the architects behind that feature, so shameless plug.
That's awesome.
So that's something I'd definitely like more people to use that feature.
I was just talking with one of our AI config specialists last week, and he had implemented basically what you're just talking about, an evaluative model that would check the accuracy that he had built in a RAG, and it was taking a small percentage of responses and running it through in an experiment to determine, is the model hallucinating or not? Is it still providing accurate answers. And I thought that was like just a mind blowing thing, but it seems so simple. So that's really, really cool. Awesome.
Thank you.
All right. So I think, I've taken up the time that I've got with you. Of course, as I talk to Josh, feel free to jump in and add,
Sure.
flavor as you want, especially, at the end when we're going to answer questions. But
Sure.
Josh, let me kind of pivot over to you and Gravity 9, because you guys are kind of at the forefront of helping companies who are attempting to implement these things and get them in front of customers. So, you're working with teams that are under pressure to ship fast all the time. And there's this, I don't know if it's a misconception or at least, there's this piece that where people think you have to slow down in order to start experimenting on something. So how do you kind of work with teams who are working with that pressure to deliver fast and convince them that the rigor of an experiment is worth, any additional time? And I'll tell why I'm throwing air quotes at that in a minute. But
yeah, absolutely, and it comes up all the time, 100% of the time. And I think what I always say is it's definitely a case of slowing down to speed up, and that's probably the hardest thing about experimentation and validating experiments, because at the start of it can seem like a lot of navel gazing around a Miro board to identify those kind of assumptions early on. And nobody wants an extra meeting, especially if it results in like a Miro board that no one's going to come back to because it's just an artifact then, right? But it's also really difficult because assumptions themselves are kind of like a bad word. And I feel like in our field particularly, there's a lot of imposter syndrome in tech, and particularly in product. And admitting that you've assumed something is almost to admit that you don't know everything, which is kind of bad. But actually, then you sort of feel like you've also exposed yourself as a massive fraud, which is awful. But everybody makes assumptions, even if you've done 100 user interviews and have reams and reams of data. Eventually, you're going to have to make a bet that something will work. And that's why it's super important to slow down, have these conversations, and then draw a straight line between your assumptions to your hypothesis to your experiments. Because if you can spend time to get your team's assumptions out about the product and the users and the technical capabilities and get them out in the open, and then identify like the riskiest assumptions that are the most in need of testing, going back to slowing down, it saves you an unbelievable amount of time later on in retroactive pivoting, development time chasing, the wrong features for the wrong users at the wrong time. And ultimately, you speed up as a compounding effect as well, because you make your team more openly admit when they're making that leap of faith and give them the confidence to voice that, rather than trying to bluff their way through incomplete data at fear of being exposed. I'll use the air quotes this time. If anything, then, you make them more confident to say, I don't know anything about this, or I don't know enough, but let's go out there and try an experiment, or let's put that on the board. I'd be more concerned about a team that didn't have any assumptions about the success of their product. Does that make sense?
It makes a lot of sense to me. I'll say the reason I threw up air quotes around slowing down is because I'm not going to say that there isn't a slowdown. There is, but oftentimes I find that that's at the beginning. As your program gets up and running, as people kind of start to digest the change in thinking and the change in process, that first piece can be a little bit slower. You might have a little bit more time. But then once you've got that process, it actually can speed things up because you're testing and you're rolling out the things that actually are causing impact, and you're prioritizing based off of things that are driving business value, and you're deprioritizing things that aren't. So does that sound like what a little bit of what you've seen as well?
Yeah, I agree. This effect compounds in on itself. It feels clunky at first. It takes a longer to set up initially, but then when you embed this within teams, then they speed up and they increase their time to value. There's exercises you can do to speed that process up. Like David Bland has a great exercise that I love, where it's like you get a 4-quadrant grid, and on the top right-hand side of that grid are your riskiest assumptions that you know the least about. You sit with your team for at least like 10 minutes or half an hour a week. You get those on the board, you visualize them. And then the ones in the top right corner are the ones that you say, okay, cool. How can we experiment around that?
Right. right. That's really good, right? Focus on the high priority, high unknown, high risk areas first, and shore up those, not, those assumptions with learnings.
Yeah.
Awesome. So one of the things there, I think, that seems important, right, and that I'm sure Gravity 9 runs into all the time, is that you work at the kind of intersection where engineering and data teams and AI and product and everything all come together. So what does it kind of look like when you come into a company and help that company, scale their experimentation programs?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think a key theme here is like democratizing experimentation and democratizing assumptions mapping, because keeping that conversation open is super critical. And in a lot of cases, what I've seen is that the optimization team can be totally separate from the product team. And then often product teams don't have any visibility about the experiments they're running or any A/B testing until the code is somewhere in production and controlled by somebody else. But experimentation needs to be front and center of product development. And the more product teams feel empowered to run experiments without having to go through layers and layers of governance and steering groups, the quicker they can make decisions and deliver that value. So what I would encourage teams to do, whether you're planning for the next sprint, the next 2 sprints, or working in safe or scaled agile where you plan for a quarter, is to drop in some experiment placeholders into your sprint plan and then hold yourself and your team accountable, because you'll know they're coming up, you know that you have to experiment, you do the assumptions mapping exercise, and you make it part of your delivery cadence. And I think one of the key things here that we, with resistance to experiments, is people think that they need to be these huge sprawling feature releases that impact, say, 50% of all users. They don't. They can be stubs, they can be low fidelity prototypes, fake door tests, anything to be able to give you the most amount of learning with the smallest amount of audience. Because often, A/B test kind of implies 50-50, whereas in fact, it can be like 99 to 1%. But so long as that 1% is going to deliver the most amount of learning for you, you've made an impact and you're able to make a decision that you weren't able to before. And again, as we mentioned with AI, then AI is so important at this stage. And I really feel that it's going to be important in the experiment culture, because all of us in tech have been talking about it for years, but there are still millions of users who are getting their heads around the concept. So we've talked about RAG and agentic workflows and everything, but experiments are so critical to understand, does that resonate with them? Does that actually deliver value? Do they care? And we really need to be validating our assumptions and continuously experimenting here. And that's what we'll find with a lot of teams now is, do we want to experiment in a way that if you deploy AI in this space, does it deliver any value? Do users care that it's AI? Do they want to see that it's AI in the first place? Because you might find that users are actually more inclined to use a model if they don't know what's going on behind the scenes, if that makes sense.
Right. I mean, the idea that the information coming back is the same, whether or not it's produced by a model or a human being, should be all that a customer cares about at the end of the day. But we're still in a place where population at large is building a lot of trust in AI, rightfully so, because as we talked about, hallucinations and things can happen. So that does make some sense to me, that maybe, there are circumstances where you kind of don't really tell if this is an agent or a person. And I would imagine in cases that's a good experiment to run as well, is telling somebody versus not telling somebody that this is model generated. And does that actually lead to, decreases or increases in purchase or whatever?
Absolutely.
Awesome.
I mean, the example I drop in there would be Apple with Apple Intelligence. There's tons and tons of great machine learning that Apple do. They don't publicize as AI, but actually the features they've tagged up as being powered by Apple Intelligence seem to have resonated less with their users. It's the stuff under the hood with the Photos app and with Notes and things like that. All of the optimization features that seem to be more powerful and make the iPhone a valuable proposition.
That's actually, I hadn't even considered that, and that is actually really true. All the geotagging and stuff that happens to my photos under the covers is something I use all the time, and I don't think I've even tried Apple Intelligence on my phone yet. So,
right.
Point, absolutely. I want to ask, I think maybe one more question, and then I'm going to kind of go on from there to make sure we got time for our audience. And let's see here. I think I'm going to go with this one. You and I think often probably get brought into meetings where a company will say, I want to build a culture of experimentation, right? I know I get into that meeting all the time. And I find almost everybody has a different definition. They all include most of the same things, but they have a bit of a different definition of what a true culture of experimentation is. In your opinion, what does that actually mean or look like in a modern company or product team? What is a culture of experimentation?
So allowing time for those experiments is absolutely key. Building them into your delivery cadence, making it almost a corporate culture that we will test often and experiment frequently. And it's part of the continuous discovery framework from Teresa Torres. She's written a great book about it that I really like. And it's kind of like, keep yourself honest, talk to your customers at least once a week, run experiments as often as you can, and map your assumptions as frequently as possible. So again, empowering your product team, at least to start with, or the wider team, to stand up and admit when they don't know something is probably the most powerful step you can take first. So instead of people saying, I don't know, I've made an assumption, and seeing that as an accusation or something like that, then answer that and answer someone saying, I've made an assumption on this with, cool, okay, how do we prove that? If you can't get the data at this stage, how do we take action to make data to validate this decision? So a lot of product teams wait for that data before making a decision, but you won't be able to do it without action. So just pull the plaster off, get an experiment out there, make it lightweight, make it a stub. It's easier these days with vibe coding. You can get something in front of a very small amount of users that can at least at least validate your hypothesis and get it done. And like I said earlier, then we think that A/B testing should involve half of your user population, whereas it shouldn't. So instructing them, look, instilling that, what is the smallest amount of users I can get to get the maximum amount of learning, so powerful to de-risk experimentation and actually see it as a natural step in product development, and almost as important as discovery, retrospectives, working with your teams, just building it into that delivery cadence. And like I said, this is going to become way more important when AI is here, because truthfully, as I mentioned, none of us know everything about AI. It's more important now more than ever to validate our assumptions, because all of us are making assumptions about where AI is going to be effective. And I guarantee that all of us will be slightly wrong in a couple of years' time, and we'll have made some bets that we weren't able to follow up. We'll have made some bets that have landed. It's important to experiment those and get them out in front of the general public to prove, does this work?
Yeah, no, that's really good. I think my answer tends to be, along those lines. It's whatever you need to do to create that safe space where people, as you said, can admit I'm making an assumption here, or I want to validate this assumption with data, and giving them, the framework, which is the experiment, to actually do data-driven decisioning, right? To gather that information and make those decisions. If you don't have the safe space, then it's all gonna just go back to the hippo highest paid person's opinion being the driver of everything. So
100%.
Awesome. Excellent. Okay, I want to take a few minutes here. I know that there may have been there are some questions I think I've seen in the chat over here. So let me see if I can jump in on maybe some of these questions. I have a question in here. How can AWS or LaunchDarkly support the activation or deactivation of tools or resources for AI agents without changing or redeployment of code? Ayan, that's probably for you, talking a little bit about some of the Bedrock capabilities, and I can talk a little bit about what LaunchDarkly is doing in this space.
Yeah, sure. So Amazon Bedrock, right? We mostly support offline evaluations, and I think LaunchDarkly is more around online, like tracking the experiment. So I think we suggest to experiment and evaluate your generative AI applications across the metrics that we have before moving the code to production. So you test it out, right? Once you are sure, then only you move the code to production. And also when the code is in production, I'd encourage you to use LaunchDarkly to continuously experiment and see how your generative AI application is responding to it.
I like that aspect of it, the fact that there's there's actually continuous evaluation that happens throughout the development and deployment and release cycle. It's not a one-time thing that you either do before you release or after you release. It's something that actually has to happen throughout.
Yeah.
And that's really super important. From a LaunchDarkly perspective, I can just kind of very briefly mention, I've mentioned our AI config product that's out there. Basically, if you know LaunchDarkly and you know the idea of feature flagging and what feature flags can do in terms of allowing you to make kind of decouple the deployment of code from the release of code, our AI config product has built in a similar kind of flag template for working with AI, generative AI models. So you can create a flag with multiple variations that change different models, different settings, different prompt technique, or different prompts, and set up and run A/B tests or experiments on those across and measure, for both technical and business value add. So hopefully that answers. If you guys haven't seen the AI config product, I highly recommend going out and taking a look at it, folks. Let me see other questions. I have another one here from Brad Johnson. Enterprise production AI adoption of AI can have steep barriers. What concrete advice do you have to get AI into use in critical business applications? Actually, this is a really good one. Now, I think both of you guys can answer.
Yeah, I can go first, Josh, if that works.
Yeah, sure.
So yeah, a couple of things, right? As we mentioned, evaluate, and across your life cycle, across your development life cycle, and also after deploying it in production. The other thing that is very important is to have guardrails for your AI application, because you just don't want to open the Pandora's box, and you want to just have the right controls on the generative AI application. So we also have Amazon Bedrock guardrails, which you can use to just, hey, I don't want my AI application to spit out some sensitive PII information. So, or I don't want the generative AI application to give some response which can harm or impact any particular section of the community. So for that, we have Amazon Bedrock guardrails, and I definitely encourage people to make the best use of it, because that's extremely important before moving into production. The other thing is you might also want to provision sufficient throughput, because you don't want to experience throttles for your users when in production. So that's another feature that we have called provision throughput in Amazon Bedrock, where you can buy certain provision throughput, right, to reserve a certain capacity, so that your generative AI applications and the foundation models perform more reliably. Yeah.
Awesome.
Those two. Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah, I think largely. Yeah, I think largely we're going to take the same approach. It's you cannot take a scattershot approach with an enterprise application and AI. You need to essentially do some retrospection and look at the largest points of friction within that application, but then also kind of zoom in and say, is there enough data in this space, and is there enough that the AI can grab onto to generate some value and some impact for users? Because if you essentially throw AI into a gap where it hasn't got data that you could trust the outcomes, then effectively you may end up making a problem worse. So you really need to talk to your users. You really need to get in front of the application and see what they're trying to achieve and say, is a generative outcome here going to generate anything meaningful for my users? And also, can I trust the output of it as well? And as Ian rightly said, is that output then going to be safe? Is it going to give away PII? Is it going to cause any issues there? So take a targeted approach, talk to your users, and use it almost as a scalpel in the right place at the right time.
Okay, that's really good. I was going to key in at first on the idea of trust, because I feel like that's probably where at least most kind of large companies' leadership exists right now. And when I talk to people about AI, I talk to people that are saying, we're trying all of this stuff all over the place in the lower environments, but we haven't taken anything to production yet. And the constant refrain is around trust in the data. So I think both of you guys have shared some really good tips around how do you build that trust as you're developing and as you're executing and rolling out your generative AI capabilities, so that it's not turn on, throw every single customer at it and see what happens, which is what businesses probably will never do. More of a kind of small data-driven approach to kind of iterative development to develop the trust and to kind of also make sure that you're solving problems that customers want solved. That sound good?
Absolutely.
Awesome.
Yep.
Amazing. I'm going to try to get maybe one more question in here. I see this one probably falls on you, Josh, you and me maybe a little bit. What are the few key best practices for conducting chaos experiments alongside CI/CD of AI services? So,
oh wow,
chaos experimenting in AI, like is chaos and AI synonymous?
Yeah, it depends on what we mean by chaos experimentation, doesn't it? Because I guess, AI is essentially pattern recognition and bringing order to chaos. If we're looking at chaos experimentation in the way of simulating disaster recovery, then of course you can look at, can we knock down the application? Is that going to affect our AI responses? Can we simulate an outage of some of our data sources that AI pulls in from? So let's say we have an agentic workflow that uses some Fabric data or some data from another API. If I take that out, does it affect the output of my LLM in a meaningful way that will damage the outcome of my users? And if it does, then what is the business continuity for that? What do we do in those scenarios? What does the user even still get to interact with the AI? Can the business still function without it? Those are the sort of things you need to look into. So if we're looking at, as I said, chaos experimentation in a business resilience sort of capacity, then it is super important to have the two coexist, to make sure that you've got failover. And actually, I know we're almost out of time, but the ChatGPT outage from the other day, like that's super important to now looking at, can we switch models at the drop of a hat? Because we may lose, connection to the API that we need to generate the outcomes for the outputs for the users. And if that falls over and it's contingent on your entire workflow, you need a failover.
That's right. That's kind of getting into that operational piece that I was talking about earlier. As these systems get more complex and more LLMs depend on the output of previous ones and data that you're getting, when you have these outages and downtimes, it brings everything down. Right. So makes sense. Awesome. All right. I think we're close to time. So I want to just kind of take the last minute or two here that we have to just in general thank everybody for coming. Thanks everybody for listening. If we didn't get to your questions, we can follow up after the fact. I think we've got note of all the questions that are here. I want to thank Ayan and Josh so much for your time and your wisdom here as we get into this. I know, just from my perspective, as an experimenter, I'm thinking about how the impacts of the customer, of these AI agents and systems on the customer experience. And a lot of it seems scary to me right now. It seems like a big black box full of scary things that I don't know what's in there. So I think you guys have really helped, give me a little bit more confidence that we're not necessarily on the doorstep of the Terminator revolution, about to lose our lives to AI or our jobs, maybe, but we'll see. Anyway, thank you so much for everybody who jumped on, and have a great evening or rest of your day.
Have a great one.
Have a great one, guys. Thank you so much.
Thank you.